Listen, and I shall tell you of the age before the gods. You know of the time when the universe was a raw, screaming infant, and the powers that ruled it were monsters of terrible strength and even more terrible fear. This is not a tale of heroes and mortals, for the world was not yet ready for them. This is the story of the very foundations of the cosmos, a foundation built upon the bedrock of patricide, prophecy, and a cycle of violence so vicious it threatened to consume creation in its infancy. In the beginning, there was only chaos. Do not think of this as mere disorder or confusion. Imagine, if you can, a thing that is not a thing. Imagine a vast, yawning, indefinite void, a chasm of pure, unformed potential. It was a swirling, silent, endless darkness where nothing was solid and everything was possible. A divine primordial womb from which all existence would eventually spring. From this great and formless chasm, the first beings willed themselves into existence, not born, but simply emerging. First came Gaia, the earth broad-bosomed and steadfast. The eternal foundation upon which all that is solid would one day rest. Then, from the deepest, most lightless recesses, came Tartarus, the great gloomy pit, a void within a void, as far beneath the earth as the sky is above it. And with them, a third power arose, a force that would drive all the stories to come. Eros, desire, the golden, procreative energy, whose presence ensured that the empty cosmos would not remain so for long. Gaia, the great mother, the very substance of the world, then gave birth from her own being, without a partner, to Uranus, the sky. He was her son, yet he became her equal and her consort, a vast, star-dusted dome that covered her from end to end, from her highest peaks to her deepest valleys. Their union was absolute, a perpetual suffocating embrace. There was no day or night as we know it, for the sky never left the earth. And from this constant claustrophobic union, children were born, a new and powerful generation of beings. First came the 12 Titans, 6 sons and 6 daughters. They were magnificent and terrible, the first true gods to walk the earth, each an embodiment of a great natural concept. There was Oceanus, the great world-encircling river; Cus, the intellect; Crius, the constellation; Hyperion, the watcher from above; Iapetus, the piercer; and the youngest, Cronus, whose mind was as sharp and cold as the sickle he would one day wield. And there were the Titanides, their sisters: Thea, the shining; Rhea, the flowing; Themis, the law; Mnemosyne, the memory; Phoebe, the bright; and Tethys, the nurse. They were beings of immense strength and pride, the lords and ladies of the natural world. But the union of earth and sky, of the solid and the ethereal, also produced other, more terrifying offspring. These were children born not of order, but of the raw, untamed power that still churned at the heart of creation. From Gaia's womb came the 3 Cyclopes Brontes, the thunderer; Sterops, the lightning maker; and Arges, the bright flash. They were giants of incredible skill, master smiths even then, but their appearance was monstrous, for each had but a single, blazing, unged, round eye set in the center of his forehead. And then came the most fearsome of all, the children that made even the other gods tremble, the Hecatoncheires, the 100-handers. Cottus, Briareus, and Gyges were their names, and they were living monstrosities of untamed, chaotic power. Each possessed 50 grotesque heads that writhed and snarled on their massive shoulders, and from their torsos sprouted 100 powerful, flailing arms that moved with an uncontrollable, destructive strength. Uranus, the Sky Father, the first king of the cosmos, looked upon these children, and his heart filled not with paternal love, but with a cold, visceral revulsion. He was a being of vast, clear, open space, and he could not abide these creatures of chaotic, compressed power. He despised their strength. He was jealous of their untamed might, and above all, he was terrified of what they might one day become. They were a threat to his absolute dominion. And so, in the first act of divine tyranny, a crime that would set in motion a chain of vengeance that would span ages, he committed an atrocity against his own flesh and blood. He took the Cyclopes and the Hecatoncheires, his own sons, and refused to let them see the light. he thrust them back into the body of their mother, imprisoning them deep within the bowels of the earth. In the dark, suffocating abyss of Tartarus, Gaia the earth groaned in agony. Her very substance, the rock and soil of the world, was stretched and torn by the constant, violent struggling of her imprisoned children. A great, unbearable pressure built within her, a pain that was both a physical torment and a mother's spiritual anguish. She could not bear the cruelty of her husband, this king who sought to rule by suppression, who refused to accept all the varied and monstrous aspects of his own creation. Her pain festered, and her sorrow turned to a cold, hard rage. Her rage, in turn, solidified into a plan for vengeance. From her own depths, from the heart of her pain, she brought forth a new element. A gray, unyielding, star-like metal called adamant, a substance that could not be broken. From it, she fashioned a great, jagged sickle, its curved edge honed to a sharpness that could sever the very bonds of creation. She then gathered her Titan children, the 12 who still walked free upon her surface, and she showed them the terrible weapon. She spoke to them with a voice that was the rumbling of the deep earth, a voice filled with ages of pain. She told them of their father's cruelty, of their brother's unjust and eternal imprisonment, of her own unending torment. She implored them to rise up, to use this sickle to punish the tyrant and free their brothers. But the Titans were afraid. To raise a hand against Uranus, the Sky Father, the absolute ruler of all things, was an act of unimaginable rebellion. They looked away, their great forms trembling, their gazes fixed upon the ground, all but one. Cronus, the youngest of the Titans, his mind as sharp and cold as the sickle his mother now offered him, stepped forward. Ambition burned in his heart, a fire that was hotter and brighter than his fear. He saw not just a chance for vengeance, but a chance for power. He took the adamantine sickle from Gaia's hand, its weight a cold promise in his grasp. Gaia hid her vengeful son in a deep crevice, a dark fold in her own skin, and waited. That night, as Uranus, desirous of love, descended from the heavens to lie with the earth in their perpetual, suffocating embrace, Cronus sprang from his ambush. With one swift, terrible motion, he seized his father's genitals and swung the great sickle. The act was done. Uranus, the sky, was severed from Gaia. The earth, his reign ended in a moment of shocking, world-altering violence. He let out a cry of pain and surprise that echoed through the void, and he rose bleeding into the cosmos, never again to lie upon the earth. Cronus, his grim work complete, cast the severed members behind him to the great churning sea. Was the divine flesh and blood mixed with the salt foam, a miracle occurred. A new goddess arose from the waves, a being of impossible beauty and desire, Aphrodite, a love born from the cosmic violence of separation. The act of castration was more than just patricide. It was the first and most fundamental act of cosmic ordering. For the first time, the sky and the earth were separate. A space was created between them, a space where light and air could exist, where clouds could form, where the sun and moon could travel, and where eventually mortal life could take root. The tyrant was deposed, and his ambitious son, Cronus, freed his Titan siblings from their terrestrial confinement and declared himself the new king of the universe. But as the defeated Uranus faded into the vastness of the cosmos, he now inhabited alone. He uttered a curse, a prophecy that would hang over the new king like a shroud for all his days. "You have done this to me," his voice whispered, a sound like the rustling of distant stars. "But know this, my treacherous son, you too shall be overthrown by your own child. Your fate will be as mine." The reign of Cronus began. For the fledgling race of mortals that was just beginning to stir upon the earth, it was remembered as a golden age, a time of effortless abundance of peace and prosperity, when the earth gave forth its bounty without toil. But in the divine realm, in the court of the new king on Mount Othrys, it was an age of cold, calculating fear. The curse of his father echoed in Cronus's mind, a constant, insidious whisper that tainted his every thought and dictated his every action. His first act as king was to reveal the true, tyrannical nature of his ambition. He had promised his mother he would free his monstrous brothers from the pit of Tartarus. But now, seeing their raw, chaotic power with the paranoid eyes of a ruler, he feared them just as his father had. He broke his promise. The Cyclopes and the Hecatoncheires, who had tasted a brief moment of hope, were cast back down into the crushing darkness of Tartarus. Their hopes of freedom dashed by a new, but no less tyrannical master. Cronus had learned nothing from his father's fall. He was doomed to repeat his mistakes. He took his sister, the gentle, nurturing Titaness, Rhea, as his wife, and soon she began to bear him children, the next generation of gods. The glorious, radiant beings who would one day be known as the Olympians. But the prophecy consumed him. He saw in each newborn face not a child to be loved, but a future usurper, a living, breathing threat to his hard-won throne. And so, he devised a horrific solution, a tyranny more intimate and more monstrous than his father's had ever been. As each child was born, as Rhea held the infant in her arms for a fleeting, precious moment, Cronus would seize the newborn from her and swallow it whole. First came Hestia, the gentle goddess of the hearth, her spirit a warm and steady flame. He devoured her. Then came Demeter, the bountiful earth mother, her power rooted in the life-giving soil. He devoured her. Then came Hera, the future queen, her eyes already holding the fire of command. He devoured her. Then came Hades, the lord of shadows and the wealth of the underworld. And Poseidon, the shaker of the seas, his infant cries already holding the roar of the ocean. He devoured them all, imprisoning them not in the distant darkness of Tartarus, but within the suffocating, living tomb of his own divine body. Where Uranus had tried to push the threat away, Cronus pulled it inside, attempting to absorb and nullify the future itself, to make it a part of his own being where he could control it forever. Rhea was broken by a grief that was beyond measure. 5 times she had felt the joy of childbirth, only to have it turn to the unspeakable horror of watching her children consumed by their own father. Her cries of protest were met with the cold, unyielding silence of his fear. She prepared to give birth to her 6th and final child. She knew she could not bear the cycle to repeat. Her heart, once a wellspring of nurturing love, was now hardened by sorrow and a desperate resolve. In her anguish, she went to her own mother, the long-suffering Gaia, the earth who had known this same pain, and she begged for help, for a way to save her last child, and to finally bring justice to the tyrant who sat upon the throne. A secret, desperate plan was formed. Following Gaia's counsel, Rhea traveled to the rugged, isolated island of Crete. There, in a deep, hidden cave on the slopes of the sacred Mount Ida, shrouded in mist and protected by the ancient earth, she gave birth to her son. She named him Zeus. She entrusted the infant to the care of the Malaya, the gentle ash tree nymphs of the mountain, and to the divine goat Amalthea, who would nurse the future king of the gods with her own milk. To protect the child from his father's all-hearing ears, a band of warrior spirits, the Caretes, stood eternal guard at the cave's entrance. Whenever the baby Zeus cried, they would begin a frenzied, clattering war dance, clashing their bronze spears. Against their shields, the deafening din of their ritual, drowning out the infant cries and hiding his existence from the paranoid king of the cosmos. With her son safe, Rhea returned to her husband on Mount Othrys. In her arms, she carried not a child, but a large oblong stone, the Omphalos stone, which she had found on the banks of a river. She wrapped it tightly in fine, soft, swaddling clothes, making it look for all the world like a newborn infant. She presented it to Cronus. The Titan King, his mind so clouded by fear and his hunger for security so absolute that he could no longer see the truth, did not hesitate. He seized the bundled rock from her arms and without a second glance, swallowed it down, believing he had consumed his final child and secured his reign forever. It was the single greatest mistake of his eternal life. In the wild, untamed mountains of Crete, Zeus grew to manhood with astonishing speed. His divine power flourishing in secret, nurtured by the ancient magic of the earth, he was a new kind of god, different from the Titans. He was not a raw elemental force. He was a being of sharp, penetrating intelligence, of charisma, and of a burning, unquenchable ambition. When he was ready, when his power had reached its full, magnificent potential, he set his plan for vengeance and liberation in motion. He sought out the wise Oceanid, the Titaness Metis, whose name means cunning intelligence, and she, seeing the inevitable tide of the future, agreed to help him. Together, They concocted a potion, a powerful emetic mixed with nectar and wine. Zeus, disguising himself, made his way to the court of the Titans on Mount Othrys, and through his charm and confidence gained a position as his own father's cupbearer. One evening, during a great feast, he served Cronus the potion, presenting it as a rare and exquisite vintage. The Titan king, suspecting nothing, drank it down. The effect was immediate and violent. A great, wrenching, world-shaking spasm seized the Titan king. He doubled over, his great body convulsing, and from his throat he began to disgorge the contents of his stomach. First came the stone, the omphalos, which clattered onto the floor of the great hall. And then, one by one, his siblings emerged. They were not infants. They were fully grown, powerful gods, their divinity having been preserved and nurtured even in the long, dark years of their imprisonment. Out came Poseidon, his eyes holding the fury of 1,000 storms. Out came Hades, cloaked in shadow and in unnerving, absolute silence. And out came Hera, her face a mask of cold, regal fury. Demeter, her power radiating with the life force of the earth. And Hestia, her presence a calm, intense heat. They stood before their youngest brother, the savior they had never known, their hearts filled with a cold, righteous rage for the father who had stolen their lives. The children of Cronus were united at last. The prophecy was coming to pass. On the slopes of Mount Olympus, they gathered their strength, their combined power a new and brilliant star in the heavens. Their gazes were fixed on the rival peak of Mount Othrys, the seat of their father's tyrannical power. The age of paranoia and suppression was over. The age of open cataclysmic war was about to begin. Part 2. The war that shook the firmament. 10 years of conflict, and so it began. Not with the whisper of prophecy, but with the roar of defiance. The 6 children of Cronus, united for the first time under the open sky, stood upon the sacred peak of Mount Olympus. Their forms were radiant, their power a vibrant, crackling energy that the ancient world had never before witnessed. Zeus, their savior and now their leader, stood tallest, his eyes burning with the fire of righteous rebellion. Beside him were his brothers. Poseidon, his presence as deep and turbulent as the ocean depths. And Hades, a figure of grim, silent resolve, his power emanating not as light, but as a profound and heavy stillness. And with them stood their sisters. Hera, her regal bearing already that of a queen. Demeter, her strength rooted in the fertile earth. And Hestia, her spirit a calm, steady flame in the heart of the storm. From their newfound fortress on Olympus, they looked south across the plains of Thessaly, their gaze fixed upon the rival peak of Mount Othrys, the ancient, brooding citadel of the Titans. Mount Othrys was a fortress of primal power, a mountain of dark, jagged rock that seemed to claw at the sky. It was the seat of the old order, the throne of Cronus, and from its heights the Titans ruled the cosmos, were beings of immense size and raw elemental strength. Cronus, their king, was a god of unyielding will, his power absolute, his paranoia a suffocating blanket over the world. At his side stood his brothers, Iapetus, the piercer, Hyperion, the walker in the heights, Cus, the questioner, and Crius, the ram. And at the head of their armies stood the mightiest of them all, in sheer physical force, the indomitable Atlas, whose shoulders were broad enough to one day bear the heavens. They were the establishment, the ancient regime, their power rooted in tradition and brute strength. They looked back across the valley at the upstart gods on Olympus, and saw not a legitimate challenge, but an intolerable insurrection, an echo of the very crime Cronus himself had committed against his own father. They would crush this rebellion, and they would do it with the unthinking, overwhelming force that had always been their way. Thus the battle lines were drawn across the heavens, 2 mountains, 2 generations, 2 ideologies poised for a war that would decide the fate of all creation. The universe held its breath, for the clash that was to come would not be fought over a city or a kingdom, but over the very fabric of reality itself. Zeus, however, knew that this war could not be won by strength alone. His father's regime was built on fear and suppression, and Zeus, in his wisdom, saw that its foundations were cracked. He began his campaign not with a charge, but with a proclamation. He convened an assembly of all the divine beings, his voice echoing across the cosmos, and made a promise that was both a declaration of war and a manifesto for a new era. "Hear me, all you who dwell in the heavens and the earth and the sea," he declared. "The reign of fear is over. I wage this war not for power alone, but for a just and ordered universe. Any god, any spirit, any being who stands with me against the tyranny of the Titans shall keep the honors and domains they already possess. And any who are without office, any who have been denied their rightful place by the old king, shall be granted them in the new order that is to come. Let loyalty be rewarded, and let merit find its place. Choose your side, for the age of Cronus is at its end." This was a masterstroke of political genius, was an invitation, not a threat. It offered stability to the established and opportunity to the disenfranchised. The first to answer the call was a being of profound and ancient power. From the darkest, deepest river that borders the underworld, the Titaness Styx arose. She was a grim and solemn goddess, and she came to Olympus, not alone, but with her 4 formidable children: Nike, the winged maiden of victory; Zeus, the burning spirit of rivalry; Kratos, the unyielding embodiment of strength; and Ba, the raw incarnation of force. She had not forgotten that Cronus had left her without honor. And she saw in Zeus a leader who understood the power of alliance. She pledged herself and her children to his cause without reservation. Zeus, seeing the power of this first crucial allegiance, was overjoyed. He honored her on the spot, decreeing that from that day forward, the most sacred and unbreakable oath that any god could swear would be sworn upon the waters of Styx, a perpetual reminder of her loyalty. But the most significant defection was yet to come. Among the Titans were 2 who saw the world not through the lens of brute force, but through the clear, sharp focus of intellect and foresight. Themis, the Titaness of divine law and order, and her brilliant son, Prometheus, whose very name means forethought, understood the currents of fate. Prometheus, gifted with the ability to see the future, had gone to his Titan kin on Mount Othrys and pleaded with them. "This war will not be won by might," he had argued, his voice a calm note of reason in their chorus of rage. "It will not be won by hurling mountains or by raw, untamed strength. The fates have decreed that victory will belong to the side that employs cunning, that uses strategy and guile." The other Titans laughed at him. They were beings of pure power. They saw strategy as weakness, guile as cowardice. They trusted in their own immense strength to crush the young Olympians. Seeing that his words were falling on deaf ears, Prometheus knew he had a choice to make: stand with his kin in their doomed, prideful charge, or align himself with the future. He and his mother Themis made their decision. They left the dark slopes of Othrys, crossed the valley, and presented themselves before Zeus on the shining peak of Olympus. They offered him not just their allegiance, but the one thing the Titans lacked and the Olympians desperately needed: strategic mind that could see the path to victory. Not all the elder gods chose a side. The great world-encircling river god, Oceanus, whose domain was the far-off, misty rim of the world, declared his neutrality. He would not raise a hand against his brother Cronus, nor would he fight against his grandchildren. He and his consort Tethys remained in their watery realm, a calm, deep current in a world of turmoil. Likewise, most of the female Titans, the Titan including Rhea, the mother of the Olympians, who could not bear to fight either her siblings or her children, took no part in the war, their passive resistance, a silent testament to the tragedy of a family tearing itself apart. And so the war began in earnest. For 10 full years, the cosmos was a battlefield. 10 years the gods fought, a decade of unending, cataclysmic violence. The 2 sides were so perfectly, so terribly matched that neither could gain the upper hand. The war was a brutal, grinding stalemate that scarred the face of creation. Do not imagine this war as you would a mortal conflict, with lines of soldiers and the clash of bronze on bronze. This was a war of elemental forces, a battle where the weapons were the very mountains themselves. The gods would tear whole peaks from their foundations and hurl them across the sky, their passage a screaming arc of fire and stone. When they struck, the impact would send shockwaves through the body of Gaia, the earth trembling in a constant, agonizing fever. The air, the primordial chaos, seethed and burned with the heat of their divine rage. The waters of Oceanus, even in his neutrality, boiled and hissed where the fiery projectiles fell. The sky, the great dome of Uranus, groaned and creaked under the strain of the endless conflict. There were moments of terrible individual glory. Atlas, a mountain of muscle and fury, would lead the Titans in great charges that would send the younger gods reeling. Poseidon would answer, his trident striking the earth and opening great chasms that would swallow entire legions of lesser spirits allied with the Titans. Hades would move through the battlefield like a shadow, a silent, terrifying presence, his power a chilling drain on the vitality of his foes. Hera and Demeter fought with the fury of mothers defending their newfound freedom. But for every Olympian advance, the raw, indomitable strength of the Titans would push them back. For every Titan victory, the fresh, desperate energy of the Olympians would rise to meet them. The years bled into one another, a blur of fire and thunder. The initial righteous fury of the Olympians began to curdle into a weary desperation. The arrogant confidence of the Titans began to crack with the frustration of a war that would not end. The universe was locked in this terrible equilibrium, a cosmic tug-of-war with two immortal armies pulling on either end of creation. The fabric of reality was beginning to fray. The stalemate was absolute. The original Olympians, for all their power and passion, were not enough. The war, it seemed, would rage for eternity, a perpetual wound upon the cosmos. It was then, in the 10th year of the war, as despair began to settle like a shroud over the peak of Olympus, that Zeus received counsel from the most ancient voice of all. His grandmother, Gaia, the earth herself, spoke to him. Her voice was not a sound in the air, but a deep, resonant thought that bloomed in his mind, a voice that smelled of deep soil and ancient stone. She had watched the war with a mother's sorrow, her own body, the battlefield upon which her children and grandchildren tore each other apart. She, too, longed for an end, for the establishment of a final, stable order. "Oh, listen to me, son of Rhea," her ancient thoughts echoed in his soul. "You fight with strength and passion, but you have forgotten the first and greatest power of this cosmos. Your father and your grandfather ruled by suppression. They feared the monstrous, the primal, the untamed, and they locked it away in my depths. They sought to rule a partial universe, and for that they fell. You cannot win this war with your power alone. Victory is imprisoned. It lies chained in the darkness where they cast it. If you wish to prevail, you must do what they did not have the courage to do. You must go down into the abyss. You must free my firstborn, your uncles, the ones they cast aside. Free the Cyclopes, free the Hecatonchires. Only then will the scales of this war finally tip." The council was a revelation. It was a path so contrary to the actions of his predecessors that it was almost unthinkable. To willingly unleash the most chaotic, most monstrous beings in creation, it was a risk of unimaginable proportions. But Zeus, in that moment, proved why he was destined to be the final king. Where Uranus and Cronus saw only a threat to be contained, Zeus saw a potential to be embraced. He understood that to rule the cosmos, one must be willing to command all of it, not just the parts that are beautiful and orderly. He would not repeat the mistakes of his father. His resolve steeled, Zeus prepared for the perilous journey. He descended from the bright peaks of Olympus, leaving the war behind, and traveled down, down. Through the layers of the world, past the roots of mountains, past the realm of the dead, to the very threshold of Tartarus. The air grew cold and thin, the light faded, and the only sound was the faint, distant groaning of a universe in pain. At the gates of the abyss, he was met by its guardian, a monstrous being named Camp. She was a horror of mismatched parts. A dragon's body with the head and torso of a woman, a scorpion's tail, and serpents for hair. She was the jailer, the embodiment of the prison itself, and she stood between Zeus and his destiny. The battle was short but ferocious. Zeus, a being of the sky and light, fought the creature of darkness and chains. He was a storm of righteous fury, and Camp, for all her monstrous power, could not stand against the god who was fighting for the future of the universe. He struck her down, and her death cry was the sound of ancient locks shattering. the way was clear. Zeus stepped into Tartarus. It was a place of absolute negation, a void of misty gloom and howling winds, a place so dreadful that even the immortal gods loathed it. And there, in the crushing darkness, he found them. The three Cyclopes, their single eyes glowing like embers in the gloom, their massive forms slumped in despair. And the three Hecatonchires, their 100 arms tangled in adamantine chains, their 50 heads bowed in a slumber of ages. They were his kin, the first children of the sky, and they had known nothing but imprisonment and darkness for eons. Zeus did not approach them as a king demanding tribute, came as a liberator, broke their chains with his own hands. He brought them nectar and ambrosia, the food of the gods, and its divine sweetness revived their ancient spirits. He stood before them, not as a tyrant, but as an ally. "Hear me, bright children of earth and heaven," he said, his voice the first note of true hope they had heard in an age. "For too long you have suffered in this cruel bondage. My father continued the tyranny of his, but I have come not to imprison, but to free. A great war rages above for the dominion of the universe. I offer you your freedom. I offer you your rightful place in the light. Join me. Help me overthrow the Titans, and you will never again know the darkness of this pit." A great rumbling cheer rose from the depths. The gratitude of these primal beings was a force of nature in itself. The Hecatonchires rose to their full, terrifying height, their 100 arms flexing with newfound strength. The Cyclopes, their single eyes now blazing with purpose, went immediately to work. They were the first and greatest smiths the cosmos had ever known, and in the fiery heart of Tartarus they set up their forge. For their liberator and his brothers, they would craft weapons of such power that they would make the might of the Titans seem as nothing. For Zeus, they gathered the lightning and harnessed the thunder, and they forged for him his ultimate weapon, the Cronus, the thunderbolt. It was not merely a spear of light, it was the concentrated fury of the sky, a weapon that could shatter mountains, and boil seas, the undeniable symbol of the king of the gods. For Poseidon, they took the deep, unyielding power of the ocean and the shuddering force of the land and forged the trident, a three-pronged spear that could command the waves, shake the foundations of the earth, and draw forth the monsters of the deep. And for Hades, they took the very darkness and silence of the abyss, the essence of secrets and shadows, and they forged the cunning, the helm of invisibility. It was a cap that, when worn, would render its bearer completely unseen and unheard, a tool of unparalleled stealth and terror. The liberation was complete. The strategic masterstroke had been played. Zeus ascended from Tartarus, but he did not come alone. He returned to Olympus at the head of a new army, an army of primal, monstrous power that the Titans had long ago forgotten and dismissed. The stalemate was about to be broken. The final battle was not a battle, it was a cataclysm. It was the culmination of 10 years of hatred, a final, explosive release of all the pent-up power in the cosmos. The Olympians launched their assault, and this time, there was no question of an equal fight. The attack was a symphony of coordinated destruction. Hades, donning his new helm, became a whisper in the darkness. He slipped unseen into the very heart of the Titan fortress on Mount Othrys. He moved among his foes like a phantom, and before they even knew they were under attack, he had stolen the weapons of Cronus himself. Disarming the Titan king and sowing chaos and confusion in their ranks, as panic began to spread, Poseidon struck. He strode to the forefront of the battle, his new trident held high. He slammed its prongs into the earth, and the ground itself screamed. A massive earthquake ripped through the Titan lines, the very mountain of Othrys groaning and cracking beneath their feet. The Titans stumbled, their footing lost, their formations shattered, their attention fixed on the terrifying god of the sea. This was the opening Zeus had been waiting for. But before he unleashed his own power, he gave the signal to his other allies. The Hecatonchires, the Hundred-Handers, let out a roar that was the sound of a rock slide and a hurricane combined. With their 300 arms, they began to tear boulders the size of hills from the earth and hurl them at the Titans. It was not a volley, it was an avalanche. A constant, relentless storm of 300 stones at a time rained down upon the Titans, a barrage so overwhelming that it blotted out the sky. The Titans were buried, crushed, and scattered by this living artillery, their brute strength useless against such an onslaught. And then, as the Titans reeled in chaos, Zeus ascended above the battlefield, a figure of pure incandescent power. He held back no longer. He unleashed the full, untamed fury of his new weapon. The sky ripped open. Thunderbolt after thunderbolt screamed from his hand, each one a blast of cosmic fire that struck with blinding force. Hesiod himself sang of this moment, of a world set ablaze. The earth caught fire, the vast forests crackled and burned, the oceans boiled and steamed, and the very air of chaos itself grew so hot that it seemed the universe would melt. The sound was deafening, the light was blinding. It was as if the sky and the earth, so long separated, were crashing back into one another in a final apocalyptic embrace. The Titans had never conceived of such power. Their strength was of the earth, of solid matter and physical might. This was the power of the heavens, of pure energy and strategic fury. They broke. Their will, which had held firm for a decade, shattered in an instant. They turned and fled, but there was nowhere to run. Overwhelmed, disarmed, and buried beneath a storm of stone and fire, the great Titans were finally defeated. The victorious Olympians rounded them up, their ancient forms battered and smoking. They bound them in unbreakable chains, the very chains that had once held the Cyclopes and Hecatoncheires, and they dragged them one by one to the edge of the world and cast them down into the misty, gloomy abyss of Tartarus, the prison they themselves had once used to be locked away for an eternity. The 10-year war was over. The reign of the Titans had ended not with a whimper, but with a thunderclap that would echo through all of time. Part 3. The Dawn of the Olympians. A new cosmic order. The thunder fell silent. The last mountain, hurled in fury, had found its final resting place, a new, jagged scar upon the face of the world. A profound quiet descended upon the cosmos, a silence made heavier by the echoes of a 10-year war. The air, which had for a decade seethed with the heat of divine rage, now cooled, carrying with it the scent of scorched earth, boiled seas, and the strange metallic temps of spent power. The war was over. On the peak of Mount Olympus, itself battered and broken by the conflict, the victors stood. Zeus, his form still crackling with the residual energy of the thunderbolt, looked out upon a universe that was his. Beside him, his siblings gathered, their bodies weary, but their spirits forged anew in the crucible of war. They were no longer the frightened, disgorged children of a tyrant. They were the conquerors of the cosmos, their power tested and proven. But as they looked upon the scarred landscape of their victory, they knew the work was not yet done. A kingdom won is a fragile thing. It must be secured, divided, and governed. The first task was to deal with the spoils of this ultimate war, the universe itself. The old order was a monarchy of one, a system built on the singular paranoid will of Cronus. Zeus, in his wisdom, knew that to simply declare himself the new tyrant would be to plant the seeds of the very same rebellion he had just led. His own brothers, Poseidon and Hades, were gods of immense power and pride. They had fought as his equals, and they would not now bow to him as mere subjects. A new model of governance was needed, one built not on suppression but on a shared and balanced power. Brothers, Zeus's voice, though weary, had lost none of its authority. We have bled together to win this world. It is not mine alone to rule, but ours to share. The age of a single, fearful king is over. Let us divide the great realms between us, not by strength or by birthright, but by the impartial hand of fate. Let us cast lots, and let the cosmos itself decide our domains. It was a gesture of profound political genius. It was an offer of equality that honored the power of his brothers, while subtly reinforcing his own position as the arbiter of this new order. Poseidon, his heart ever restless like the tides, agreed at once, the prospect of his own vast, untamed kingdom appealing to his nature. Hades, ever silent and watchful, gave a slow, solemn nod. His realm was not one of glory, but its power was absolute, and he knew it. And so, in the center of the battered throne room of Olympus, the lots were prepared. Some say they were stones, each marked with a symbol, drawn from a golden helmet. Others say they were nothing so crude, but three shimmering motes of pure destiny, swirling in the air, waiting to be claimed. The three great brothers stood before them. The fate of creation hung in the balance. Zeus, as the leader, went first. He reached out his hand, and a lot flew to him, glowing with the brilliant, blinding light of the upper air. He had drawn the sky, the heavens, the ethereal realm of clouds and stars. The seat of ultimate power from which all below could be seen and governed was his. He became Zeus Olympios, the king of gods and men, his authority now sanctioned by both victory and fate. Poseidon went next. His hand closed around a lot that shimmered with a deep cerulean light, and he felt the pull of the currents. The immense, crushing weight of the depths. He had drawn the sea. All the oceans, the rivers, the lakes, and the springs were now his domain. He was to be the Earthshaker, his trident, a scepter of power over the vast, mysterious, and life-giving waters of the world. Finally, it was Hades' turn. The last lot drifted into his waiting palm. It did not shine. It absorbed the light around it, a mote of perfect, silent darkness. He had drawn the underworld. The vast, gloomy, subterranean realm of the dead, with all its shades and secrets, was his. He was to be the king of the departed, the unseen ruler of a kingdom to which all mortals, and even gods, must eventually pay respect. The earth itself, the great body of their grandmother Gaia, and the high peak of Olympus were declared common ground, accessible to all the gods. The division was complete. The new government of the cosmos was a triumvirate, a shared power that promised a stability the universe had never known. By casting lots, Zeus had not diminished his power. He had secured it, earning the loyalty of his brothers not through fear, but through respect. With the spoils divided, the matter of justice remained. The vanquished had to be punished, their power broken so completely that they could never again threaten the new order. A great and terrible procession began. The defeated Titans, those who had stood with Cronus, were dragged forth in their adamantine chains. Their immense forms, once proud and defiant, were now bowed and broken. A despair as deep as the pit that awaited them settled in their ancient hearts. Zeus, his face now grim and implacable, pronounced their sentence. They were to be cast down into the deepest, darkest, most dreadful corner of creation. They were to be imprisoned in Tartarus, and what a prison it was. The bards who sing of it, drawing from the words of Hesiod, describe a place of absolute horror. It is not merely a part of the underworld. It is a separate primordial void beneath it. So deep is this abyss that a brazen anvil dropped from the heavens would fall for 9 days and 9 nights to reach the earth. And from the earth it would fall for another 9 days and 9 nights to finally strike the floor of Tartarus. It is a place of misty gloom, of howling, storm-racked winds, a place so loathsome that even the immortal gods who know no fear shudder at its name. Around this great chasm, Poseidon, with a single mighty blow of his trident, raised a wall of solid bronze. He forged great gates of bronze and set them in the wall, gates that could never be breached. And as the defeated Titans Cronus, Iapetus, and the others were hurled screaming into the darkness, Zeus appointed their eternal guards. In a stroke of perfect poetic irony, he commanded the Hecatonchiars, the hundred-handers, to stand watch at the gates. The very beings who had been the first victims of the Titans' tyranny, who had languished in that same pit for eons, were now to be the jailers of their former oppressors. Their 100 arms, a living, insurmountable barrier against any hope of escape. But for one Titan, a different, more terrible fate was reserved. Atlas, the mighty general of the Titan armies, the one who had led the charge against Olympus, was brought before Zeus. For him, the passive darkness of Tartarus was not enough. His punishment had to be active, eternal, and symbolic. Atlas Zeus's voice boomed, no longer the voice of a rebel, but of a king pronouncing final judgment. You fought to control the cosmos. You sought to tear down the heavens. Your punishment then shall be to uphold them, but you will not be cast into the darkness. You will stand at the western edge of the world, at the rim of all things, and you will bear the weight of the sky upon your shoulders. For all eternity, you will be the pillar that keeps the heavens from crashing down upon the earth. You who fought against my order will now become a fundamental part of it. And so Atlas was taken to the edge of the world, to a place where the sun sets in a blaze of fire. And there, the great, star-strewn vault of Uranus was lowered onto his massive shoulders. The weight was unimaginable, a crushing, cosmic burden that would have pulverized any lesser being. But he was a titan, and he could not die. He could only endure. He became Atlas, Telamont, enduring Atlas, his eternal agony a constant. Visible reminder of the price of rebellion and the absolute power of the new king. His punishment was not just a torment. It was a structural re-engineering of the universe, turning the greatest of the rebels into a cornerstone of the new regime. The war was won. The enemies were punished. Kingdom was divided. And yet Zeus, the king of the gods, was not at peace. For the curse of Uranus, the bloody prophecy that had driven his father to madness, still echoed in the halls of fate. He, too, had a father to overthrow. And he, too, had been warned that he would be overthrown by his own son. His first wife, whom he had taken before the war, had even reached its climax, was the wise and beautiful Titaness Metis. Her name meant cunning intelligence. It was her counsel that had helped him trick Cronus into disgorging his siblings. But Gaia, the great, all-knowing Earth Mother, came to Zeus with a final terrible prophecy. Metis, she told him, was destined to bear 2 children. The first would be a daughter, a goddess of wisdom and war equal to her father in all things. But the second, a son, was fated to be the one who would depose Zeus and become the new king of the gods. The cycle was poised to begin anew. The same dreadful choice that had faced Uranus and Cronus now lay before Zeus. He could see the path they had taken. Uranus in his fear had tried to suppress the threat, to push it away, and in doing so had armed his own wife and son against him. Cronus, in his paranoia, had tried to consume the threat, to internalize it, and in doing so had turned his own body into a prison from which his doom would eventually erupt. Both had failed. Both had met violence with more violence, and both had been consumed by the very cycle they sought to control. Zeus stood at the precipice of the same abyss. He could feel the pull of that same fear, but Zeus was different. He had allied himself with Prometheus with forethought. He had listened to the counsel of Gaia. He had freed the monsters his father had feared. He understood that power was not just about strength, but about wisdom. He would not repeat the mistakes of the past. He would not try to destroy the threat. He would not try to imprison it. He would do something far more radical, far more brilliant. He would absorb it. He would make it his own. He went to his wife Metis, as she was heavy with their first child. He spoke to her with words as sweet as honey, praising her wisdom and her beauty. He challenged her to a playful game of transformations, a contest of their divine power. Metis, delighted, changed her shape, first into a lion, then a serpent, then a stream of water. "Can you make yourself small?" Zeus asked, his eyes gleaming with a terrifying purpose. "Can you make yourself as small as a fly?" Metis in her pride did just that, transforming into a tiny buzzing insect. And in that instant, Zeus opened his mouth and swallowed her. The act was not one of hatred or of violence in the way his father S had been. It was an act of supreme, strategic assimilation. He did not destroy cunning intelligence. He made it a permanent, inseparable part of his own being. He internalized the very quality that could have been used to outwit him. He would not cast the blade away. He would become the blade. By swallowing Metis, he ensured that no one, not even his own fated son, could ever be more cunning than he. The prophecy was not defied. It was diffused from within. Time passed. The day came when Metis's first child was due to be born. Splitting headache, an agony of cosmic proportions, seized Zeus. He roared in pain, his cries shaking the foundations of Olympus. He called for Hephaestus, the smith god, and commanded him to take his great axe and split open his head. Hephaestus, trembling, did as he was told. He brought the axe down upon the skull of the king of the gods, and from the wound a miracle occurred. There was no blood, no gore. Instead, a brilliant, blinding light erupted, and from that light a figure sprang forth, fully grown, clad in shining armor, a spear in her hand and a shield on her arm. She let out a tremendous war cry that echoed across the heavens and the earth. It was Athena, the goddess of wisdom, of strategy, of crafts, and of war. She was the daughter of the prophecy, born not from a womb that could be separated from him, but from his own mind. She was his equal in wisdom because she was born of Metis, but she was eternally loyal to him because she was born of him alone. The threat of a rebellious son was gone, transformed into the birth of a loyal and powerful daughter. In that moment, with the birth of Athena from his own head, Zeus finally, definitively, broke the bloody cycle of succession. I had faced the same prophecy as his father and grandfather, but through an act of supreme cunning, he had achieved what they could not, a stable and eternal reign. He had proven that he was worthy to be the final king, for his rule was based not just on the overwhelming power of the thunderbolt, but on the internalized, unchallengeable wisdom of Metis. The age of chaos was over. The age of Olympus had begun. The universe was ordered, the old gods were imprisoned, and the new king sat secure upon his throne, his power absolute and his wisdom unmatched. From this new, stable firmament, a million other stories of heroes, of mortals, of love, and of tragedy were now waiting to be born.